Cathedral port or rectangle port LS cylinder heads, what's the difference? When it comes to Gen 3 and 4 GM engines, there are two primary intake port shapes: cathedral port and rectangle port. The heads can be interchanged mostly from engine to engine, but you need to know what head you're working with because not only do they have different performance characteristics, they require different intake manifolds, and some heads will not work on certain displacements. The first LS engines were cathedral port. In fact, all GM Gen 3 engines came from the factory with cathedral port heads. They're easy to spot because the intake port looks like a church's cathedral window, thus the name. Generally speaking, when compared to rectangle ports, cathedral port heads are smaller and have smaller runners, which creates higher velocity in the intake runner, which is better suited for low to mid-range power. Rectangle ports can be found on Gen 4 engines, and while it's true to say that all Gen 3 engines were cathedral port, some Gen 4 engines are cathedral port, some are rectangle port. Visually, the difference is really clear. Rectangle ports don't have the cathedral shape. They also tend to be a little bit bigger. They have bigger ports, tend to have bigger intake runners, which makes these ideally suited to larger displacement engines or engines that are making big power, where that low speed velocity isn't as critical. It's also worth noting there's an outlier here, the LS7 head. These were found on C6 Z06 Corvettes and 5th gen Z28 Camaros, which means you're not going to just stumble over these in the junkyard. These were called either a raised rectangle port or a square port, depending on who you ask. Here we have an intake manifold for a regular rectangle port, and then this intake manifold is actually for an LS7. And you can see that the port is raised when you compare it to the regular rectangle port manifold. Casting numbers will tell you a lot about the cylinder head, even if the engine's assembled and you can't see the intake ports or the chambers. GM put LS cylinder head casting numbers kind of front and center, so they're easy to see. And with a little research, you can ascertain things like runner volume, valve sizes, and chamber volume. While you can physically interchange the two cylinder head designs onto just about any LS engine, you have to be careful, and in particular be careful when you're swapping rectangle ports onto a cathedral port engine. Rectangle port heads that were designed for a larger displacement engine can cause serious trouble if you put them on a smaller engine with a smaller bore, and you can actually run the valves into the cylinder walls and cause all sorts of trouble.